Sex Talk.
Hi, I'm Mo.
And I'm Elle.
And today we're having the Sex Talk. And today, what are we talking about, Elle?
Well, this month, it's July, and so it is Disability Pride Month. So we're going to be talking a little bit about ableism and about how differently abled bodies and folks can interact with sex and sexuality. And
Such an important topic. I think that we able-bodied people aren't always aware of how the world is sort of shaped to suit us. And when something doesn't suit us, we, as able-bodied people get frustrated. And so this is something really important for us to look at.
Well, yeah, and I would actually say that kind of the structure of ableism really negatively impacts all of us, because all of us have bodies that are going to work differently at different times in our life. And when we get this one script of what life is supposed to look like, and then when we talk about in the sex talk what sex is supposed to look like or sexuality is supposed to look like, it's really limiting. And so I don't think that many people fit into kind of the ableist paradigm. But then especially when people feel like they're navigating a world that isn't structured to fit their needs, or that they're inhabiting a body that they're not seeing represented in a lot of different media and materials, it can be really confusing about where do I fit in and how do I show up, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked, before working at Last, I worked in dialysis, and I have worked with a lot of people who've had chronic illness and changes in their body, amputations, things like that, that really changed the way that they navigate the world. And there hasn't been a lot of modeling about kind of how to cope when that happens and how to inhabit a body that's anything different than what we see in the magazines or in the media and that sort of thing. And it can cause a lot of distress.
Yeah, it is stressful. It's stressful to feel like this world isn't designed for you, right? It's stressful to feel like what you need to do in order to live your life is made harder by the way that the world is structured.
Right.
So.
Right. To feel like an other instead of to feel like, a person, right? And that's what we really set up for, unfortunately, in many, if not most of our communities, right?
Right. 100%. So let's dive in.
Yeah. So, I think working with folks who have either developed a difference in their body, whether it is that they suddenly find out that they have a chronic illness, or there's some kind of accident or something that changes the way that their body functions or body looks. So then they start to identify as someone who's living with a disability. I would say that the first thing is really about helping to kind of work through the grief of that, the grief of kind of what we were talking about earlier, like feeling like we're not fitting in anymore, that we don't have what we think we are supposed to be operating in the human experience. But we know that the human experience encompasses all bodies and all different kinds of functioning, right? But that can be really hard when we've seen only this one model, right?
Right.
So a lot of that is around the grief of letting go what we think things should be like, and starting to really think about what is the body that I am inhabiting now, right? Yeah.
So letting go of grief is a really great first step, but I think in order to let go of the grief is the acknowledgement, right? That there is certainly grief there when we've had to live a certain way for, I think a lot of times that grief is, it's like we don't realize that it's there, we might have a lot of different names for it. We might have trauma, we might be calling it trauma, or we might be calling it something else, but acknowledging that there's grief there is a really great first step, because that's the step in which you know that you've been living with something that you've potentially been maybe blaming yourself for, or you've been punishing yourself, or whatever that looks like for you, and the overarching umbrella of that is grief.
Yeah, and even as you're talking, I'm thinking about, there's other emotions that come up too, like, there really can be a lot of anger. And we talk about anger as a component of grief sometimes, but I also think that, when we think about the way that this world is set up to really only support kind of a select few in our society, right, that there's a lot of really relevant anger to the system, right, to this idea of like we only validate certain human experiences, right?
Yes.
And so, moving through anger and just real frustration with the system and the world that we're living in, that makes a lot of these different paths, these different human experiences feel much more difficult than they really ought to be, right?
And also, when you realize that you're angry about whatever, all the pieces that you're angry about, on top of it, you're also holding on to the guilt, the blame, the, why am I this way? All of these stories that, this ideal able-bodied creates, right? So you're holding on to so many different emotions, feelings, ideas, and I think just acknowledging that, right, this ideal is very narrow, is very limited.
Right. Yeah, right. And I think the story that we get told in our world right now is that in order to be happy, in order to be fulfilled, in order to have a good sex life, we have to have a body that looks and functions in a certain way. And that's absolutely incorrect. That there is any range of human emotional experience, can absolutely be had by, and physical experience as far as like there's pleasure in any body, right? There's, and so something that's been really wonderful that I found is that when people actually do experience a shift in the way that their body is functioning, or a shift in the way that their body looks, and like initially that can cause this distress, this like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This doesn't fit in with the narrative of what it's supposed to be like, right? And we really do have narratives that that kind of perpetuate these ideas. Once we're able to move past that, then there can be this like mapping of like, well, where is pleasure in my body? What can my body do? What does feel good in my body? And then we actually can see that people can have more satisfying, fulfilling sex lives, more satisfying, fulfilling relationships, because, like I said before, that ableist narrative actually doesn't work for most of us,
for most
right?
people. Right. Well, it's an ideal that's very difficult to achieve. Right.
Yeah, and it's and I think like our views or the scripts that we get about sex are very kind of basic and narrow in the beginning, and so when I have people come to work with me, it's a lot of times it comes down to that same thing of, this is what I was told that my body is supposed to like, it's supposed to do, this is how I'm supposed to feel, and that actually doesn't work, right? And so this idea, this kind of radical idea of like getting into what is my body like? How do I follow the pleasure? It's so kind of revolutionary, even though it sounds really simple. Yeah.
Well, see, the thing is when you're fed a story, when you're fed an idea over and over and over and over, and your story doesn't fit into that idea, your brain immediately thinks that there's something wrong with you, right? And so here we are getting all of these messages that this is what sex should look like, and this is what your body looks like when you're having sex, and this is what your body looks like, and none of that aligns with you. You don't identify with any of that, you don't look like any of that. Then you have no role models. I mean, we're, as human beings, we really come together because we have community. Like, community is how we move forward in life. And when media plays such a big role, and then messages, and they can come from friends, family, doctors as well, and they don't align with us, we immediately go into this place where there's something wrong with this. We go into shutdown mode. We stop pursuing the very things that that, you know, make us come to life,
Right.
so to speak, I guess.
Right.
And sexuality and pleasure is one of those things. So there's this very strong narrative that only a certain type of person is allowed to experience pleasure, right?
Right.
And so it is radical.
Right.
It is very radical to say, you get to experience pleasure, I get to experience pleasure, you, the sex talk watcher,
Yes.
you get to experience pleasure, right? And how do we do that?
Right. Yeah. And actually, you know, as you were talking, something came to my mind, which was this really, I mean, there's so much incredible media that is coming out now
Yes.
that's around differently abled bodies and bodies that look and perform in ways that are unique to that person, right? And how they can have pleasure. And, you know, one wonderful example is a man who did have, I forget what occurred, but ended up having no sensation from the belly button down. And now he has found through pleasure mapping that he can orgasm through someone manipulating his thumb and giving him a thumb job. And so, you know, that's what I really say when it's like, oh yeah, there's like so much expansion in this idea of like, what is sex? What is sexuality? Right? And just having to get through that hurdle, that idea of like that sex isn't for you unless you look a certain way, and that's totally not true. So yeah, just like exactly what you're saying, regardless of your age, regardless of your body shape, regardless of what extremities you may or may not have on your body, right? You can still experience sexual pleasure and joy and connection, and that's not just reserved for a select elite few. Right?
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. So, is there more?
I think that's what I wanted to say. Was that I definitely want to move through or past this idea of you know, these really harmful ideas that sex is only for certain people, and also that people are only desirable in certain forms. Because I will tell you, regardless of the body that you are inhabiting and how you think it should or shouldn't be, that you are absolutely sexy. That sexiness comes from something different than our physical form, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brains are sexy. You know, ideas are sexy. People's people's aura or the way they carry themselves.
Yeah.
What people say. So like if I hear someone say something, the tone of someone's voice. You know, there are so many different things that I find attractive in a person, and usually physical appearance is the last thing I look at. I mean, physical appearance definitely plays a role, but I think I want us to start paying more attention to how that ideal of what is physically attractive, how we've also all been shaped to desire that, right? And when we sort of get more mindful about, you know, like this person that you're talking about who learned about he can orgasm by his thumb.
Yeah.
When we sort of get more mindful about the very different ways our body can experience pleasure, we can also start to get mindful about the very different things we find attractive, what we find hot. We're also, you know, and this is a little bit of a derailment, but it kind of goes along. We're also a society that's very much focused on penis and vagina sex, right? And so many people don't identify with that. I mean, I talk about that ad nauseum on this channel. So, you know, penis and vagina sex is just kind of one example of how they fed us this very narrow thing that really doesn't suit a lot of people. Really doesn't even suit most people. Even if you identify as heterosexual, most people find that it's pretty limiting what they do give us access to, I guess, is a good way of saying it.
Right. And I'm thinking about like growing up, there was the like first base, second base, third base, home run, and home run was intercourse. And so I just want to say, like, you get to define what your home run is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be intercourse.
Well, it doesn't even have to be with another person.
It doesn't have to, exactly.
Yeah, or it can be with 10 people. I mean,
Sure.
you get to decide.
Right, yeah.
And it could have no fluid involved. It could be with another person and there's no fluid exchange, like mutual masturbation. you get to decide.
Yeah, and I would say too that if you are someone who's wondering how can you be sexual in your body the way that it is today, calling and setting up a consult with some of us at last, talking to a sex therapist or a sex coach, I mean, just it's really helpful because things like I love the framework of what is a good sex position. A good sex position is where you can do what you want to do while you feel comfortable and relaxed, right?
Yeah.
And so we, like, that's not what the Kama Sutra or Cosmopolitan magazine has us believe, right? But really this kind of shifting to what are the things that you want to feel in your body, and then how can you access that and amplify that? Mm-hmm. And there's so many ways to get around it when we stop thinking about performing for what it should look like, and we start saying, oh, what does work for me, what does work for my body, and how can I engage with that?
So that was it for today. The sex talk.
The sex talk.
Ding, ding, ding.
Sex Talk.